I'm Alyssa Phillips. I own a graphic design business called Amped Designs. I am a studio of one, and I do branding and web design. And I also founded Make Your Design Matter, which provides resources and conversations for self-employed designers. And I'm super excited to talk with my friend Eric. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. That was a great intro. And for those who may or may not know, my name is Eric Vasquez. I'm a key art and brand designer based in New York City. I also have a YouTube channel formerly called Teach Me to Design. Now it's just Eric Vasquez Design. Ever since I went full-time freelance last year and started my own LLC. So I am now working as a creative business owner and similar to Alyssa, an agency of one, trying to wear a lot of different hats. But we love to share content. We love to talk about freelance, business, branding, all of that great stuff. So we are super excited to dive into the freelance frontier with everybody today.
Yeah. So we decided to broach this topic of things we wish we knew before freelancing because we've kind of noticed that there's a lot of info out there about like how great it is to freelance and sort of like glorifying things like, taking vacations and, accounts that post like all you have to do to have 10K months is do like XYZ and you can do it in your sleep. And while this might sound contradictory because as a freelancer, like I love freelancing, but I think sometimes we can get really caught up in that kind of stuff and think that like we must be doing something wrong if we don't have what other people are sharing. And there's not a lot of conversations out there about what it's actually like to start and the fact that most people don't start working for themselves and just have like immediate financial success and all of these clients. Sometimes maybe, but most of the time that's pretty rare. It takes time to build up to. So we thought we would just have a conversation about this and talk about some of the things that most people do realistically experience and just kind of normalize that that's all part of the journey. So before we sort of dig into the thick of the conversation, I'd also love to hear from all of you in the chat if you feel like sharing your favorite thing about freelancing as well as the hardest thing. So feel free to share your
Mm.
thoughts. And then, yeah, while you're thinking about that, um, Eric, do you want to maybe mention how, like, why you started freelancing? What's your
Yeah,
story?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and just to add on to what you were saying, Alyssa, I think it is really important just to acknowledge and talk about the fact that, like, yeah, there is a lot of that sort of like compare despair sometimes, right? When you see people who are like, I made, $20,000 in like a day or like a week, and I'm surfing on a beach somewhere, and like it's just this really dramatic, like glamorization of what working for yourself is like. And while that is fantastic, and of course would be something great to be able to achieve, I think sometimes it can just feel like so far away from where we are now, and it can feel a little bit like like discouraging, right? If you're like, well, I'm just getting started, or like I want to start, but it's never really quite as easy as people might make it seem, and it's never quite as maybe all glamorous as people make it seem. So I think it's important to put that out there and just be honest about that, just with social media in general, right? There's a lot of like people seeing like the highlight reels, and then people can get down on themselves if they don't have that too. So I just want to like make that understanding that like it's okay if you're starting off and you're not there yet, because I'm not there yet. A lot of us aren't there yet. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, like the reality of being a creative business owner and a freelancer. That's a lot of work. So yeah, I think I'm guilty of like comparing myself sometimes to other people and feeling a little bit discouraged. So I just want to acknowledge that like that's totally normal and it's okay. And it's something I've talked about with other creative friends like Alyssa with before, where sometimes when we compare ourselves, it's not always a bad thing. It's in some ways I think it can be helpful, right? And feel free to, check me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like sometimes when we compare ourselves, it's a signal almost that like there's something about this situation that we want, right? Like there's something about that that is appealing to us. And that's okay. I think that that's just a way for us to try to identify what kinds of things do we want for ourselves in our own lives, but
Yeah,
without, feeling like the impatience of it, if that makes sense.
that's so true. And like one person's definition of success is not everyone's definition of success. And like someone who might have this glamorous looking lifestyle might have a whole bunch of other things going on behind the scenes in their business that go along with that that you don't want. So pros and cons to everything. And
Exactly.
yeah. I
So,
also, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say that I totally relate to
uh,
the things that have been shared. I think coming out of tax season, we probably can all agree that taxes are not on the plus side.
yeah, I
Um,
was just taking a second to look over at that comment as well that right before you read it. So it's I just wanted to say thank you to the people who are like sharing with us some of their favorite things and their most difficult things.
yeah,
If
those are great. So how could you remind me, and I guess tell everyone how long you have been working for yourself and how slash why you started doing that?
100%. Yeah. So I think everybody's journey is a little bit different, right? And I was thinking about it before we kind of came on to this call and this conversation today about how for me, like I kind of started my design career in like 2010. I moved from Connecticut to New York to kind of I wanted to work in entertainment. And as soon as I got here, I immediately started talking to creative placement agencies. Creative Circle was the first one. And I met with a woman there named Jocelyn Yant, who was like one of my favorite recruiters ever. She's super nice. I haven't talked to her in a few years, but she was so helpful in those early days. And she shopped my portfolio around for me and got me a gig with Nickelodeon. So I started off working for like a 3-month contract gig at Nickelodeon. And some of my designer friends and people in New York City might have worked for Viacom, like VH1, MTV, Nickelodeon, a lot of those companies. And for those who have been there before, it's one of those places where it feels like, is anybody full time here? Because it just feels like it's like an army of freelancers and like two staff people, which is kind of funny. So for me, like I started off doing that, just kind of bouncing from place to place. I ended up getting a job with Oxygen, which used to be Oprah's network. And they had, Bad Girls Club and all that stuff before they got into true crime. And that was kind of like what got the ball rolling for me. From there, I went to World Wrestling Entertainment, Major League Baseball, Sci-Fi, A&E, and a handful of other like networks and agencies in New York City. Um, but what's interesting, and this is kind of like, something that I'd love to get your thoughts on and other people who are joining us today, is that for the longest time, I had this idea in my head that, okay, if I can just go to New York City, work in entertainment, and like get a job doing key art, then like I'll be so happy, right? Like everything, like the world will be right, right? Everything is good. But then once that happened, it was like, well, this isn't really the solution for everything, right? It's not all I thought it was going to be. So then it was like that target moved. Now, if I can just like make more money, right? If I can go from making whatever, $40,000, like my very first design job, to 70 to 100. And so I kind of continued to like raise that bar for myself. And this is what I have heard referred to as arrival fallacy. And I think it's something that a lot of other designers might have experienced or could be experiencing currently, where in our minds we build something up, like some kind of personal goal to be the thing that is going to make everything, great. Like once I do this thing, I can be happy. Once I do this thing, my
Mhm.
life will be great. You know what I mean? And so I kept chasing that. And I realized like I'm not happy. Like I'm achieving these things, but something is missing, right? Like something is off. And I couldn't figure out for the longest time what it was. And, I started trying to do coaching in the start of the pandemic, thinking, okay, let me try to like build something here. That didn't really pan out as much as I wanted it to. Um, and then, I was working for A&E and I got laid off last April. And about 2 weeks after I got laid off from my full-time job, my mother passed away from stomach cancer. And it was heavy. Like it was a really difficult time in my life. And it just sort of forced me to like take a look at what I was doing, what I wanted, because I knew that it had to be more than just, working and like making decent money. And I think, through looking at ourselves and asking ourselves like what actually makes us happy, there had to be some other component, right? Like satisfaction, freedom, flexibility, just more than what I had. And so that kind of like is what inspired me to start my own LLC and just start working for myself, because I was tired of just leaving my fate and my career in everyone else's hands.
Hmm.
Uh, so that is the not so short version of of
I
how
think
I got
that's
into
very
freelancing.
relatable though. Yeah. Yeah. I yeah, that's interesting. So, and you, I think it's also interesting that you mentioned that you were like a contract worker for these other agencies, which I think when people think of freelancing, generally you think of working one-on-one with clients, but there's
Mm.
different options. So did you, yeah, do you have a, what do you have a preference, I guess, for like the long-term in-house freelance gigs versus like working one-on-one with clients?
Well, it's a good question, because when I think sometimes when you're working full time or your staff or in house, however you want to, phrase it, there's a lot of times where there's so many people in between you and the client versus, when you're freelancing, as you probably know, a lot of times you're dealing directly with a business owner or dealing
Mhm.
directly with your client. Um, so I like being able to like be in the room when decisions are being made. It's hard when you feel like you're putting in so much time and effort onto a project, and then someone else just says, "Okay, we're going to go present this now.
Yeah,
We'll get back to you." And then it's like you're just kind of sitting and waiting. And you a lot of times you're not even in the room when those conversations are being had, when your work is being presented, when important decisions are being made. And that was something that I often felt like a little upset about when I was working in house at places,
yeah,
because I wanted to be a part of that. Like I cared, I'm invested. But when you freelance, right, and when you work for yourself, I feel like you have more opportunities to sit at the table, to be
yeah.
there with the clients, to have a conversation, right? To see like what are they feeling, what are they thinking? Because sometimes that stuff gets lost in translation. But how has that been for you, like as someone who has had their own business?
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the things that I enjoy most. And the reason that I started my business was it wasn't not choice. Like I chose to do it, but it was a little more spontaneous and just sort of I probably wouldn't have done it as soon as I had. So I
Right.
was living in New York before and working for agencies there. And kind of spontaneously, about 7-ish years ago, my boyfriend and I decided to move to Asheville, North Carolina. And literally within a couple weeks, we just put in our 2 weeks and decided to move. And I had done a little bit of research about Asheville before that and looked into the design community. And I even had talked to some designers in Asheville. And what I had found was that there didn't seem to be a ton of available in-house positions or agencies. And I thought it could take me a little while to find a job. So I will just try freelancing when I get there and see how it goes.
Sure.
So I did. And it ended up being a really, really good, yeah, like Katie said, that's kind of, yeah, bring your own job. Um, but it ended up being a really good fit for me because I didn't realize how much I would actually enjoy being the person that talks to the clients and like
Right.
handling all that admin stuff. It just ended up being like very natural for me. And that relationship aspect was probably my favorite part. Um, but I guess to get into like things we wish we knew before freelancing, I'd be curious to get your thoughts as well. But for me, I think when I started, and I'm thinking of if we think about like what we think is going to happen versus what actually happened, in my mind, I definitely kind of saw it as like just kind of going with the flow. I'm just going to have to take any job that comes my way.
Yeah.
And now, like, all of my clients will essentially be my bosses. I didn't really think about the fact that, like, as a freelancer, you are essentially running a business of one. Like, that's what you're doing. And so I didn't really, the whole like freedom and autonomy thing that everyone actually like goes after freelancing for, never even like considered that.
Huh. It's
Um,
interesting.
well, I think I thought about like, oh, it'll be nice to go grocery shopping in the middle of the weekday if I want to, but I didn't really at the beginning. I well, aside from not really knowing anything about the business side of things, I didn't really grasp that I could say no to a project if I didn't want to do it. And like I could tell a client like this is my process and this is the way we're going to do this. Like I don't have to do exactly what they tell me, how they
Yeah.
tell me to do it. So that was definitely a learning process to feel like more confident in kind of like leading the client. Like they're not my boss, like I'm my boss. Like we're together as collaborators. So yeah, what
Yeah.
about you? Was there anything you didn't see coming?
Well, no, I think you raised a good point, right? Because there is more of a relationship there. And Vince in the chat said, you know, it's crazy how guilty that made me feel at first, like I was getting away with something. And
Mm.
I think that's absolutely right, Vince, because um, anytime that I was working like in house, it's like I felt guilty for taking a break. You know, like I would feel guilty for like leaving my desk for like more than like 30 minutes.
That's something I still struggle with, honestly. Yeah.
But that is something that I wish I knew before I started working for myself, that like that's okay. Like,
Hmm.
and part of the reason why I think it's not only okay, but it's good to take those breaks, is because I've never come up with my best ideas while I'm sitting in front of a screen, just like stressed out and anxious. Usually, most of the time, I come up with like my best creative ideas like when I'm doing something else. You know, like if you're going for a walk, if you're out grocery shopping, if you're in the shower, if you're exercising, like sometimes you need that opportunity for stillness in order to allow creative ideas to come to you. And sometimes it can be hard to do that when you are under the pressure of a tight deadline, or you have somebody, you know, hovering over you, like, oh, where are we with this project? Oh, can you move it a little bit to the left, make the logo bigger, like all that crap, right? That just makes you feel like really stressed out. So that is something that I wish I knew before, is like that it's okay to start, to take those breaks, to step away from your desk. And I
Hmm.
hear you, like that. It doesn't sound like that was a driving factor in what made you decide that you wanted to start your own business. It wasn't like, I want to do this so that I can have all this autonomy. It sounds like there were some other things there for you that were maybe more important to you than that, or just other things that felt more relevant at the time.
Yeah, it was more like I don't want to say necessity because I could have looked for a job. But it was more like this is the best option at the time. Was yeah.
Well, especially like you said, when you move to Asheville and bring your own job with you,
Yeah.
have to pave your own way.
Yeah, exactly. So, what were some of the biggest challenges that you experienced when you started that you maybe didn't expect and had to learn how to navigate?
Yeah, I think that's there was a lot. There was a lot, right? And I was thinking about this before our call today, because I was trying to sort of imagine like what are the different paths that can lead somebody um to making that decision to like work for themselves, or making that decision to go full-time freelance or become a creative business owner. And I feel like I've met three types of people, right? There's the people who maybe go to college or university and then come out and start freelancing right away. I think there are people who go to college or university and then like kind of work like in the field for a little while and then start their own business, like what I did. And then I think there's people who maybe bypass college and uni altogether, right? They might
Hmm.
just know, hey, this is what I want to do, and they start
Hmm.
immediately trying to build their own business. And I might be missing one, but I feel like those are sort of the three paths that can kind of lead someone to freelancing and to starting their own business and being self-employed. Um, And I think each one has their pros and cons. Now,
Hmm.
I will say I can only speak from my own experience here, but I feel like having 10 to 14 years of experience working in-house for other companies taught me so many valuable things, not only from like different ways of working, from like being on teams to having, good managers and like creative directors above me who I could learn from, to see how they presented work, to see how they approach projects and like learning those processes, to learning print production, like, all these things that I just feel like I wouldn't have learned them, or maybe not as quickly as I did, had I gone immediately into freelancing without having that experience. That's just for me personally. So I feel like, when I finally made this decision to start, it felt like, okay, I feel like I finally have all of that knowledge and information I need. Like, I feel like I've done so many things for other people that I could probably do it for myself now, and it just felt like the right time. But having said all that, there was still a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know and I wasn't prepared for, um, especially things around money and clients and work-life balance. I think those are three very big pillars that
Yeah.
are very, very different for someone working for a company versus for themselves.
Yeah.
I'd love to dive into that a little bit deeper with you, but what would you say are some of the big kind of things that you faced when you decided to start your own business?
Well, I agree because I also had worked for agencies before, and I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to have those experiences because I agree I learned a lot, but I also
Yeah,
realized that like not everyone has that option. And there's, yeah, like you said, a lot of ways to get into the field.
mhm,
But that said, even though I had the experience of working at design studios, I knew like how to get through a project and like how to do work for clients and all that kind of stuff. The thing that I didn't have was actually being the person that talks to the clients because I was just kind of like the designer in the back, like you said at the beginning. And there was always a salesperson or the art director or someone who would have the meetings. And so I
yeah,
think that was one of the challenges for me at first was just getting better at navigating that. I'm also very introverted and I I think I've gotten a lot better. Like when I started out, I was very, very shy. Like the idea of having a meeting with a client would make me so anxious. And so I will also say, like, if anyone else here can relate to this, I can promise you that the more you do it, the easier it gets. Because now I mean, I'm definitely nervous before I present work to a client, especially if it's like a big project, but it's
yeah.
not nearly as like anxiety inducing as it was the first couple times. So that was hard, just like learning like what do I need to ask them? Like how do I have a sales call? Like how do I end the conversation? Like just silly little things like that that I never even had to think about before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big one. I think a lot of designers and creatives are inherently introverted, and it can be challenging, right? Because we get so focused, like we're in the zone, we're focused on the work, the project, and then it's like, if someone else comes in, you're just kind of like, leave me alone. Like, I don't want to have to talk about the work now because like, can't you just see it? Don't you understand what I'm trying to do? And so there is a big component of like, now we have to get comfortable talking about the work in a way that
Mhm.
non-creatives can understand too, which is a skill that, I'm sure you developed the more you did it. Like you said, it's one of those things. It's like getting the reps in, right? It's like the more you do it, the stronger that muscle gets. But you're absolutely right. I think it's something that is fairly common with designers and creatives for sure.
Yeah, I think that also doing work for yourself or even for a boss, or well, not for a boss, for a client, but the boss is the one critiquing your work, is really different than doing it for a client because it feels like I think it can feel really personal to get feedback sometimes and to like sometimes try and help a client understand like why you made the design decisions you made and stuff like that. It can be frustrating. And so I think another thing I learned was that I need to remember like the client is not a designer and they're like relying on me to teach them these things. And so that kind of was a good mindset shift to like not get offended, not get upset, not like think they're asking silly questions. Just kind of remember that like this is my job. This is not their job.
Right.
Um, yeah. And just yeah, like navigating those communications definitely took like a lot of practice, but yeah. Um, what about are there any like can you identify any like moments or situations where you're like, oh my gosh, that was a huge mistake. I should have never done that. That you like
Yeah.
you learned from.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. But so real quick, just to recap, right? Like two of the big things that we talked about so far, two of the big things that we wish we had known before we got into self-employment. One was like that it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to like get away from your desk for a while. Give
Yeah.
yourself opportunities for stillness and room to come up with ideas. The second thing is kind of talking to clients, right? Like I wish I knew how to deal directly with clients or to communicate my thinking and my processes more clearly to people who might not always be have the same creative background, right? They might
Mhm.
not be designers themselves.
Yeah, that
So
was a
those
good
are
recap. Thank you for
just
that.
two, just for anybody who's like just catching up. But to answer your question, I've definitely had a lot of those like moments where I feel like, oh no, like why did I do that? Um, like a good example is a time when I should have said no to a project. And
Mm-hmm.
this is something that you touched on a little bit earlier, is a lot of times when you begin working for yourself, it can be very easy to feel like you have to say yes to everything, right? To
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have to take on any project that comes up. Um, and it took me a while to understand that I don't have to do that, first of all, because like by saying no, you're just determining if something is like a good fit. Like if I don't honestly think that I can do it and I'm not interested in it, like I probably shouldn't do it. But also I might then help them find somebody who is a better fit. And like that's okay if it's not me. Um, but there are other times too where you might be super busy and it's a project where you really do want to work on, but maybe you just don't have the bandwidth. So there are those situations when you really have to assess like, should I and can I take this assignment on? Um, so there have been times where I've taken on like a logo project or a branding project for someone, and it was a time when I didn't really have a whole lot of other projects going on. And I basically began working with this client who asked me to create a logo for them. And once I started, I think I got on like the third or fourth round of logos. The client then decided to start sending me their own drawings and sketches of like what they wanted. And I was like, okay, like
Oh
this would have been
no.
have like 4 rounds ago. And but I said, okay, whatever. And I basically replicated what they had provided me, or as close as I could, in their sketch. This person was not a creative or a designer, so it was a very kind of loose, like napkin drawing kind of thing. But then after I replicated it, they proceeded to just like change their mind about everything and be like, oh, but I actually like the way you did this better in the first one, and I like this better. It just became this runaway train. Um, and basically, after going back and forth, I think 7, 8 rounds into this thing, I just said, like, look, I'm sorry. I don't really know what you're looking for. Like, I don't know if I can like help you with
Mhm.
this at this point, because I honestly just felt like I had exhausted all of the options. And at that point, it was kind of a situation where I had to just cut the client loose and say, like, I'm sorry, like I didn't, charge them for more than just the retainer to start the project. But that was something when I wish I had just said no, from the get-go, because had I known that
Mhm.
it was going to turn into that, which I didn't really have any way of knowing, I guess. But
Yeah.
that was definitely a situation where I wish I had just said no, maybe a little earlier.
Yeah. I feel like, well, maybe you feel differently. Tell me if you feel differently, but I feel like that's a good situation where like you learn like what to look out for to prevent that from happening again. Like maybe you learn like that was a red flag that I didn't notice the first time I talked to them, or even like maybe like next time I'll put this clause in my contract that prevents this from happening or something like that. So I feel like for me at least, like even though I have situations like that that I just cringe when I think about, I learned something from it. I don't know
Yeah.
if you feel the same way. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, someone in the chat, I think it was Allison, maybe mentioned taxes, and that had
Mm,
me thinking about. I was trying to think like, what is my biggest mistake? And um, I think this goes back to also like thinking about freelancing as running a business and how I mentioned like that wasn't something I really grasped at the beginning. And so
sure.
when I actually like started looking into my, like finances and like what do I need to like legally be doing to offer services to clients and all that stuff and like got my LLC and like got business insurance, all that kind of stuff. I learned that I was supposed to be charging my clients sales tax. And I would recommend everyone check with an accountant in your state about this because it's different from state to state. But in North Carolina, some graphic design services are sales taxable, even if nothing is printed. And I had done like a year of work and not charged people sales tax. So I couldn't go back to them and be like, can you pay me sales tax for this project we did months ago? So I had to pay like $1,400 out of pocket for sales
No.
tax that I didn't charge. So that was hard. And it really like I think made me realize like how serious this is. Like if you're making an income from working with clients, like you are not exempt from any laws and taxes
Yeah.
just because you're
Yeah.
one person. So that was a big realization for me.
Yeah, 100%. Taxes are super important. It's one of those things that like everybody hates,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, oh, it's one of the necessary evils. And that's the thing is when it comes to things that we wish we knew about before we became self-employed, it's definitely like putting money aside for taxes or charging sales tax. Um, Maybe you pay quarterly taxes, or in some cases, what I do is I have a separate bank account where I just put taxes or money aside for taxes like each quarter, every few months. The general rule of thumb that I follow, again, I'm not like an expert in this, but is to approximately put like a third of what I earn from freelance into that account if it's not already being taken out
Mhm.
by an employer or by a client. So that's a big one, right? Putting aside that money for taxes to make sure that you don't end up in a spot where you could potentially owe a whole lot more. I mean, obviously it sucks paying $1,400, but at least it wasn't $14,000.
Exactly. Like could have been way worse. Like I could have learned that after 6 years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, okay. And so kind of jumping off of what you mentioned about your client who wasn't happy and you decided to part ways, I imagine that was not an easy conversation to have. So how have you like navigated some of the most like sticky conversations with clients?
Well, what's funny is like just looking back at like times when I was working for companies as a full-time person, you can't really say like, no, I don't want to do this project, right? Like imagine like your boss comes to you and they're like, hey, Eric, we need you to design this like these banner ads for this like, sock company that's like coming out and you're like, socks, I don't want to design anything for a sock company. Like give that to somebody else, like you can't do that when when you work in-house for somebody. But if you work for yourself, you can say like, oh, I'm not try to be diplomatic about it, right? Oh, I'm not sure this is the best fit for
Right.
me, or I'm a little booked right now. Can I
Mhm.
refer you to somebody else? So like you have opportunities to say no and turn down work, um, which is something that I actually like being able to do that sometimes. Um, because again, you don't have to take on every single thing that comes your way. And that's something I wish I knew earlier, because in the example I was talking about with this logo project, I took it on because I was just in a place of like, oh, I just kind of need like some extra money right now. But it became this nightmare project where I can't remember exactly, what was said, but I tried to be very nice about it and like, look, I feel like we've gone back and forth a few times. I'm trying to deliver, what you're asking for. Um, but I feel like, we've gone back and forth on this, for a while, and I just don't know if I'm the right person to help you with this, and it sort of sucks because there is a feeling of like, oh, like did I like let this person down,
Yeah.
Am I like a shitty designer because I can't do that? But you're also trying to hit like a moving target, right? Like how can you design something when the person is constantly changing their mind, which happens a lot, right? But it's like you don't always understand like what the person is looking for. So that was an important lesson. But like you said, Alyssa, I think it also showed me that I need to ask earlier on, like, hey, if you have any examples or like, is there something specific that you want me to create here? Like, give that to me earlier on in the process. And like, I'm only going to do, let's say, like 3 rounds of changes for you in this project, or in the scope of work, which again isn't something you can do when you work in-house. You can't say, all right, I'm only going to do 3 rounds of changes for you, and after that, I'm
Yeah.
piss off. You can't really say that to people when you work at a company, but like it would be nice sometimes to say that. But yeah, times like that can be challenging. Have you had any experiences where you've had to maybe like turn away a client or like cancel a project once it was underway?
I've had one, but I also wanted to mention to your point of like asking the client like more questions about what they want and stuff. One thing that I was noticing a couple of years ago was that I think a lot of designers, while we can be accommodating for the client's design style, like in general, we have a style, like we have an aesthetic style that we're good at. Like your work
Yeah.
looks like a family of work done by the same person. And I tend to have like very flat, geometric, vector shaped designs. And for a little while, I kept getting clients that wanted like a hand-drawn style for their logos. And it was really hard for me. And so one of the things that I implemented was like, I need to make sure that they've seen my work. I need to make sure that like they know like what my style looks like.
Right.
So I, before that, would take inquiries kind of like wherever they came from. Like if someone just emailed me out of the blue, that could be their inquiry. But now I funnel them through my website. And I think there's something on my form that's like, here's where my work is, and here's what my packages and prices are. And look at them before you reach out, basically. And so that was like helpful for at least like making sure people who got in touch liked my style of work. Uh,
Yeah.
so that I didn't feel like uncomfortable with what I was producing. But to answer your question, um, I do feel really grateful that in 6 years of owning my business, I have only had to cancel one project. And it was kind of a mutual decision. I pushed her to cancel, and then we ultimately like agreed that it would be a good decision. And it was really hard because I think most of us can agree, like we want our clients to have a good experience. Like you don't want your client to walk away and say, oh, so and so was a terrible to work with. Like, no one wants, a bad Google review, anything like that. Like we want people to refer us to other people, to come back and work with us again. So like it was really like mentally tough for me to think that like I had let this person down, but also like not be too hard on myself because it is like a two-way relationship.
Yeah.
Um, and canceling the project was like my absolute last resort if nothing else worked. And so from that situation, I ended up adding stuff to my contract, of course, and then like some new stuff into my process to like make it easier for me to enforce my boundaries. Because what had been like hard for me that had led to this was I had let a lot of my boundaries slide for this client because I'm a
Mm.
yes person. I just, when someone asks for something, I want to be accommodating. And it just got to a point where I felt like they were really like taking advantage of that. And now they wouldn't accept no at all. So I kind of learned like I need to have my boundaries in place in the beginning, and I need to like stay firm on them throughout the whole project. Um, so that was tough. In general, something else that has helped when I've had like little disagreements or, just difficult requests here and there is I always will save responses in Notion. So if I ever
Mm.
have to respond to the same thing again, I can like use what I wrote as a template, and I don't have to like agonize over trying to write an email again.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I think, like a process, and it's not easy. I don't think it ever like gets easy, or I would, that's not the right word. I would say like it's not like you don't care about if you have a bad situation, but it does get like more preventable, and like you feel like more prepared to deal with it, I think.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I mean, I think that's a great answer, but I also want to say for anybody who might not know this already, Alyssa, you have a really useful and valuable script of sort of like responses that you can use for these sort of tricky or sticky client situations. And I've used a few of them myself. I think
Oh,
they're phenomenal.
yay. Great.
Um, so Alyssa has taken the time to put a resource together for creatives that can, use these type of, like just responses, right? Things so you, like you said, so you don't have to agonize over them. I've used a few of them, especially if I reach out to a prospective client and like they don't get back to me. It's like when you feel like you're getting ghosted, and it's kind of like, hey, like just, checking in, and it sounds like you might have gone in another direction. Like, best of luck with everything. Let me know if you need anything. Something along those lines. I remember using for like a little while back. And the amazing thing is that after receiving no response for like 2 weeks, after I used your template, they got back to me and they were
Oh my
like,
gosh.
oh, yeah, they were like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, we're just, we're having some internal conversations. Like, we'll get back to you, something along those lines. But it did get them to respond. So it was a success.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I'll share the link in the chat at the end for that. But wow, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, so definitely check out some of those resources that Alyssa has kindly put together. But to
Thanks.
your point, Alyssa, I think you're absolutely right. Like, nobody wants to be thought of as like, a designer who let their client down. Nobody wants to let their client down. And I think, you know, when it comes to freelancing or being a self-employed creative, one of the things that I wish I knew before was the importance of having like a review or a testimonial or something like that, right? Like, anytime I was working for a company, I didn't really care. It's not that I didn't care, but it wasn't as important because like the company had a reputation and I was just kind of like representing them as an employee. But when you work for yourself, it becomes more about that personal relationship, right? That you develop with your clients, the reputation, your standards and practices. All those things really matter so much more. And that's something I didn't really know a whole lot about before, but I wish that I had. And the reason why I think that that's so important now is because if I finish a project with a client, a lot of times, like I'm asking them for testimonials now. I'm asking them for like a reference or to just leave me a review, right? And it's something that I can put on my LinkedIn profile. Maybe I can put it on a website because you want people to know what they can expect when they come to you to work with you as a
Mhm.
freelancer or a self-employed creative. So, I'm sure you've had some situations like that too, Alyssa, where you've probably, had to ask somebody for maybe a review or a testimonial or something like that. Have you ever asked the clients for those? And if so, have you found them to be helpful?
Yeah, I do at the end of every project. And I actually have a custom form built for it because this is another thing I learned. Was that the Google reviews, I felt like I was getting like very generic, like Alyssa was great to work with, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And so I started asking, I built a form on my site for feedback that asked very specific questions like how did you feel before and how do you feel now? And like what would
all
you
right.
tell other people who are thinking about working with me, so that I could like essentially get a testimonial that actually says the things that would actually make someone see what the value is.
That's
Um,
great.
so yeah, I would recommend that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, okay. So this has been great, and we have maybe 10 minutes left, and we can definitely answer some questions if anyone has any. Feel free to drop them in the chat. To lead up to questions though, what would you say would be like your biggest piece of advice, or you can do a couple pieces of advice because I think it's hard to
Okay.
choose one.
What's your favorite food? What's your favorite movie?
Yeah.
Lightning round.
That you wish your biggest piece of advice that you wish you had had before you decided to freelance.
I think it would just be like like you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great, right? Like knowing just that you don't
Hmm.
have to have everything figured out right away. You don't have to have all the answers when you're starting out. Nobody does. But you have to start at some point if you want to get to that point. Like you, like every great journey, every successful business, they started somewhere, right? And maybe it's those early days when you're finding your footing, when you're unsure of yourself, when you're unsure of, where is my next client going to come from and things like that. Like it's okay not to have that all figured out. I think when you're starting, you just have to have a certain amount of like, I guess just belief in yourself, right? And like a desire to do it. Because there are a lot of times when it can be hard, when you're waiting to get paid by clients or when you're waiting to find your next project. So that would be one piece of advice. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. That was
I love
something
that.
that somebody told me a few years ago and it stuck with me. But how about
Yeah.
you? What would be something that you would like to share?
Well, I love that because it kind of goes off of what you were saying about like always wanting the next thing. So I feel like sometimes you can get stuck in this cycle of like, I'm not good enough yet to start. And like, if you always think that, like, you'll never start. So
Yeah.
sometimes eventually you just have to do it. Um, but I would say, oh my gosh, there's so much that I wish I had been told. I think the one thing for me is always still like, I wish someone had told me that I would be running a business. Um,
Mm,
and not just a freelancer. Um,
right.
and like along with that, like the value of branding yourself like a business, like having a website that's like a business website, like not just a portfolio with a resume, but like these are my services and these are my prices. And um,
Packages too. You mentioned
yeah,
packages.
and like doing the same brand strategy for yourself that you do for your clients because like you're helping them market and grow their businesses, but you're also marketing and growing your own business. And if you don't have your own brand figured out, that's really hard to do. I think like when I finally, I think it was about, well, so I like had been self-employed for about a year and then I took a business class and then I did the LLC. And
Mm,
during the business class was when I was forced to do that. And as soon as I took some time to actually think about who my business was as a business, not just a freelancer, so many other things fell into place like really easily. Just like having that foundation, which is exactly what we tell our clients is going to happen. So it's sometimes like we have to take our own advice.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a great point. Like figure out what are the services you want to offer. Maybe break them down into tiers or into packages and think of yourself as a business rather than just a standalone portfolio like as a designer. Like it is something that needs to encompass a larger thing. That's a really great piece of advice, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one question. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we had gotten a similar question like this one on Instagram as well. So I think this covers both. Allison said, my current biggest struggle is finding good quality clients. Any advice on marketing yourself and finding good clients?
Hmm,
What do you think?
great question.
Or do you want to start or should I?
No, no, take it away. You can go for it. I'll add on after you, please.
Okay, well, I definitely can relate to the struggle, and I think it's something that is a roller coaster. Like, I think anyone who works for themselves has probably had like times that are slow and times that are really busy, and it's it can be really hard when it's slow and like feel like you're doing something wrong and like where did all the clients go? And so something that just kind of like, in case anyone has like experienced slow and busy times, one thing that helps me is to just like remember that's not always going to be like this. Just like
Yeah.
reflect on times when it hasn't been. But when I started out that was probably like my biggest hurdle, was just like getting enough clients and getting good clients to like sustain me and be able to pay my bills. And the thing that was most helpful for me to find good quality clients was networking. And I know Allison lives in Asheville as well, and we have a really, really strong business community. There are so many events for small businesses and like women entrepreneurs and things like Chamber of Commerce meetups and like women in wine, as well as like design focused groups like AIGA. And it's definitely a long-term game, but that was the thing that had the best results for me. And it usually would be like, I wouldn't go to an event and find like 9 people who need design, but I would go to this event over and over again and see the same people over and over again. And like a year later, a couple people might come back or refer me to someone else. And so it was a long term, but that was definitely the most helpful thing, like way more helpful than like online ads or, responding to Facebook group posts that have like 30 responses from designers. So that's the thing I would recommend. What about you, Eric?
No, that's great. Did you say Women in Wine is one of the groups?
Yeah, we have like a women in wine chapter where this is like business owners, women business owners at a winery drinking wine and
That
talking
sounds
about business.
amazing. Yeah. Can I join that group? That sounds fun. I think what your response was great, and I think something that you touched on there was really hammering home the importance of networking. It's a numbers game. The more people you talk to, the more chances you have of meeting somebody who could potentially benefit from your services. And I think it's important to not limit yourself to, to just ads or just, putting your website out there and hoping that the right person sees it. I think you have to get crystal clear on what are the services that I want to offer, what type of work do I want to do, and then figuring out how to connect with those people. Like, where are those people spending their time? Maybe there are like better quality LinkedIn or Facebook groups where some of those professionals are. But I think you just have to take the time to drill a little bit deeper to find those. And if you can't find them online, then look to things like AIGA or BIN or some of those other like in-person networking events. But I would also say leave some of it to chance, right? Like, there's something beautiful about just serendipity, right? Just like being out in the world and being like open to meeting someone and striking up a conversation, because you never know who you could bump into, right? It could be a barista at a coffee shop who's like, man, I'm really trying to like get this business off the ground. I could really use a good like website or brand designer. So I think those are some of the things I would say could be really helpful for trying to find quality clients. Um, and marketing yourself, right? It's just about having that clarity on what type of work do I want to do and who do I want to do it for.
Yeah, yeah, you just never know like who you're gonna meet and like when they may come back into your life and stuff, like you said. Um,
Yeah,
I really love this question from Vince, which is how do you separate your self-worth from the success of your business and projects?
great question. Yeah, that's a good one.
What do you think?
All right. Yeah, sure. I'll start with that one. So Vince, yeah, how do you separate your self-worth from the success of your business and the success of your projects? I think when you're a creative business owner, self-employed, it can be really hard to separate those things, right? Like, if you work for someone else, for a company, and you're an employee, sometimes it can be, I think, a little bit easier to just turn it off at the end of the day, because you're like, okay, my job is done. I can just put it aside until tomorrow. But when it's your success, your projects, it's hard to not feel like intertwined and like so connected to it. But one of the things that has really helped me is by looking inwards, right? I'll be honest. I think looking inwards and deciding for myself, what are other things that make me happy aside from my projects? What are other things that I enjoy doing outside of this business? Can I spend time doing those things for myself? Because those things are going to make me feel happy. Those things are going to help me have more balance. And those things I think are going to help with my feelings of self-worth, because even if a particular project doesn't go like swimmingly well, I will know that like, okay, like I'm still worthy. Like, I am still a complete person. You have everything you need to do this. and to just have that confidence. And I think that comes from like seeing your skills and your capability applied to other areas of your life that might not be like critiqued so much, if that makes sense. But what are your thoughts, Alyssa?
I mean, that was a great answer. I think, well, when I read this question, I was thinking about like getting critique from clients and like maybe clients not totally happy with your work and that kind of thing that can make you feel like you're not doing a good job. And I think for me, I am always trying to like put myself in the client's shoes and have like empathy for how they might be feeling and the fact that they're not a designer. And so something that just helps me is to remember that it's not, they're not critiquing me, they're critiquing something for their business. And it is
Yeah, yeah,
for their business, it's not for my business. And most of the time it's not personal, like it has nothing to do with like your skills as a designer. They're just trying to make it right for their business. um
yeah.
yeah, and just kind of like remove my personal attachment to my work. Like I definitely want to be doing work that I'm proud to put in my portfolio, but at the end of the day, like it's not for me, it's for the client.
Right. 100%. We're providing a service, right?
Mhm.
It's about what they want.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to stay a little longer and answer questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm loving the questions. I would be happy if if anyone wants to stick around, we'll get through the rest of these. We'll answer everyone's questions. It's totally fine with me.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to do that as well. But just in case anybody does have to leave at 2, just want to say thank you for coming.
Yes,
And
thank
I
you.
will pop our info in the chat if you would like to stay connected to us. And I also want to let you know that the email scripts that Eric mentioned, I do have a code set up for 10, oops, my message is too long. Um, I did set up a code for 10% off for everybody here. So if you're interested in grabbing the email scripts, you can use the code freelance at the checkout at that link if you would like that. And then Eric is gonna send something via email afterwards, right?
Yes, 100%. I just also wanted to say thank you to everyone for spending some time with us today. For anyone who has stuck around, I'll also be just sending a follow-up email with a little freebie that I put together for everyone for being here today.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thanks again. In case anyone has to leave, you're welcome to leave. We appreciate you coming. We will answer a couple more questions if you have time to stick around. Okay, so we have a question from Caitlin that is, how did you go about refining your product offerings or services? Was it based on industry niche, or areas of interest slash design experience? Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so for me, when I started, like I said, I was kind of just doing like anything and everything. And it was when I really started to do some of that strategy around like, okay, what do I actually enjoy doing? What type of clients do I want to work with? Then it became easier for me to like put a package together. So now I kind of identified like branding and web design are kind of my core services. Those are my favorite things to do. And I would prefer to make the proposal process easier on myself by having like a packaged offer. And I can customize it if I have a client that needs something outside of what I have. But for me, I didn't really want to write custom proposals for every single project. So they can essentially pick this package, this package, this package. So that was kind of how I went about that. And then it was somewhat based on industry, I suppose. I definitely, there are certain industries that I enjoy working with, and will not necessarily seek out, but um, try to aim to do more work with. But for me, it's mostly like a personality fit, to be honest. Like I'm really just looking to work with people who are like good natured, have a good heart, doing something good and easy to work with. But that said, because I do try to work with certain industries, I did sort of build the packages around like what would be good for this type of business, what would be good for this type of business. And, you know, of course, I can customize from there if there's someone who's something outside of that.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think that's a great response. I guess, the only thing that I could add to that is like, when I was starting off, and for anyone who is kind of starting off, I think it's important to like try like a vast array of different things in like design, right? And kind of see which things you gravitate to, which are the things that you enjoy doing the most. Like you said, as far as types of work goes, what are the things that make you feel excited? And just kind of like listening to that, following that thread, and then being able to tap into like, okay, well, what is that audience looking for? How can I solve that problem? And then like tap into that, right? And if you see like things coming up over and over again, then figuring out, okay, well, maybe what is some kind of package that I could put together for them. And if you're starting off, I would recommend maybe doing like a three-tiered thing, maybe something like that's very not, reasonably affordable for people who might not have that much money, then maybe something a little bit higher, and then have your like, your highest sort of offer for those clients and companies that have a little bit more in the
Mhm.
bank to spend.
Yeah.
That's what I
There's
did.
also this psychology of like having three packages where people tend to choose the middle one. So something about having three is helpful. I've
There you
heard.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, okay.
great question. Thank you, Caitlin,
Yeah.
for the question.
Okay, Kathleen asked, what advice would you give to someone who's transitioning from agency finance? Did you mean freelance, maybe? Agency freelance, agency finance, into an art director or key art designer role? What techniques should they focus on? Start a portfolio, but trying to prepare. This is definitely a question for you, Eric.
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'm wondering if maybe Kathleen meant like a finance focused agency, maybe
Oh, I
something that
see.
like if you're a designer, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Kathleen, but if you're a designer, it sounds like you may have a lot of experience primarily in finance, but you're looking to transition into an art director or key art role. Um, what specific techniques should one focus on to learn for key art design in Photoshop, Illustrator, etc.? I think some of the biggest things are learning the fundamentals. Here's the thing, right? With when it comes to key art, what I love the most about key art is the fact that it combines so many of the other things that I love, right? It combines retouching, it combines photo compositing and color correction, but it also combines things like branding, logo design, as far as like title treatments and overall, layout and storytelling, right? So I would try to focus on each of those areas, like to as far as your techniques, right? Like focus on like photo manipulation and retouching. And then how can I add typography or a logo to this for a title treatment that doesn't just feel sort of like an afterthought. Like for me, that was something that took me a long time to learn. Was I would spend so much time trying to craft this nice like photo composite, and then I would get to the end and just like slap the type on, and I didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. So I think it's about really focusing on those separate skills, and then how you can, marry them together, but make sure that you're giving each one, a good amount of thought and focus. And then I think, if you start by putting some personal projects like that in your portfolio, whether it's like fan art or something you're making up yourself, like imagine that you already have that job that you're going for, right? What would somebody look for in your portfolio? Like, and then put those projects in your portfolio so that if a client comes to your website, they'll be able to see, oh, well, this person might not have a lot of key art experience, but they obviously have the skills to do it because their portfolios are already full of very similar projects. So that's what I would recommend as far as trying to prepare for a role like that. And I think hopefully that will help you steer you in the right direction.
That was great. Thank you. I'm
Of
going to opt
course.
out of answering that one. Um,
How about the next question?
yeah, okay. So Alexa asked, just starting out, a lot of friends are asking for help. Have you had experience in how to approach pricing for people you have a personal relationship with? So
Mm.
yeah, that's very relevant. A friend and I were actually talking about potentially having a whole conversation just about working with friends and family. So for me personally, I will do free work for my parents. Anyone else, it's basically Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Here's my website with my packages. Let me know if you'd like to inquire. If so, here's the form to do. Like I just treat them like any other client. And if they then actually fill out the inquiry form and are willing to pay the price that they see on my site and all that, then I'll have the conversation and see how it goes. But a lot of times, um, they haven't looked at my site at all before they reached out and they'll be like, oh, okay, thanks. And then I never hear from them again. So that didn't really answer the question. I think it's very personal as well. Like some people may be way more willing to do free or lower cost work for friends and family. Others aren't, and it's fine. I think it's totally up to you. Um, I think that if you are going to do it, it's still important to have a contract in place. It doesn't matter if it's just a friend. You can say, like, just for formality's sake, you can make it lighthearted, but it's still really important to have like your boundaries and how you're going to work and like who owes who what, just so that you don't end up like potentially souring a relationship. And then just like treat it like any other project. Like, no one is exempt from your policies and no one gets extra things that they didn't pay for unless like you choose to do that. But I feel like I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over. But again, I would make it clear that, like just like you would do for any other client, like if you're going to throw in something extra, like make it clear that that's a courtesy, to avoid getting like stepped on. But I would do
Yeah.
that for any client.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's a good question. I think you answered it really well. And it's also something that Alexa said is, if you're just starting out, right? So
That's
if
true.
you're
Yeah.
just starting out, it kind of depends where you are in your journey, I think a little bit.
Yeah.
If you are just starting out, maybe you're looking to build up a portfolio of a specific type of work, in which case, you may consider doing it for a lower price, especially if it's something that you're still developing your skills and expertise at.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't do it for free, right? Like I would give them, sometimes I'll offer what I call like the friends and family discount,
Yeah.
and like I might offer somebody like a lower rate, but again, it depends on the project. It's kind of a case by case thing. For example, I have a cousin who is like an architect, and he does pretty well for himself. I don't talk to him very often, but he decided to start his own like chicken wing company. Like he makes these bomb ass
Oh my
wings.
gosh.
And so he
Cool.
was like, so he came to me and he's like, oh, like I need some like branding for my wing company. And I was like, all right, like this is what I charge for like logos and et cetera. And he's like, oh, he's like, I don't really have, any money. And I'm like, dude, you're an architect. Like you have money. Like I know it. And he's like, but he's like, just trying to like get the work for like cheap or free even in some cases. And he's like, I can pay you in wings. And I was like, I like the wings, but like, that's not gonna keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Um, so, so, so in that case, I was like, look, man, like, I love you, but like, maybe I'm not the right fit for this. And if that's the case, like, I'm happy to like point you in another direction, maybe with somebody that can help you. And then I will offer him some recommendations, for people on Fiverr or
Yeah.
something like just people that are not as that don't have as much experience in it. So I think it's a case by case thing. I don't think it's ever okay to do it totally for free because there is labor and energy involved and you should be compensated for that. But considering where you are in your journey and your level of experience, I would maybe just consider offering like a friends and family discount instead of doing it for free.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like starting out definitely makes sense to like that's kind of actually really helpful potentially to build the portfolio.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. We also have from Sarah, how important is it to have your LinkedIn profile up to date slash verified?
Oh, Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
I do you
Hi, Eric.
oh, hi
Hi,
Sarah.
guys. Sorry,
Hey.
I got in late. You guys might have already talked about it, but I appreciate, yeah, just it's just curious about that because I'm really bad about keeping it all up to date. So,
Oh, that's
The-
a good question.
yeah.
Thank you for jumping in too. No, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I was gonna check with you. Do you have yours verified on LinkedIn?
I don't know if mine is verified or not. I mean, I know that that's like something that people do on Instagram and things like that. To be totally honest with you, Sarah, I don't know how important the verifying is for a profile. Like, um,
Hmm.
yeah, just being honest, I don't actually know, but I would say like having the profile updated is a good thing to do. It's also one of those things that like nobody wants to do, right? So it's like, but I do think it's good, right? It's tricky though, um, sometimes for me at least, like as a freelancer, right? Like as you know, like I've worked with Sarah a little bit. Sarah's an amazing, talented designer. She worked as a finisher. She does amazing key art. She's very talented. But I think it can be hard sometimes if you're just like freelancing in a company for a little while. Like, what do you put on LinkedIn? Like, will it be like I freelanced here, like on and off for like 3 months or like a year? I think situations like that, I'm not exactly sure what the best
Hmm.
um to go is, but I do think, keeping other stuff updated is important because look, I mean, for me, everybody's different, right? But for me, LinkedIn is probably the social platform that I'm on the most. Um, just because, in our line of work, right, with key art and entertainment and things like that, I personally feel that's where a lot of, business professionals are spending their time. So because of that, I would say that keeping your profile like reasonably updated is probably pretty important.
Hmm.
Um, at least having, some featured projects, like you can put some featured projects up there, like in like a carousel, have your title, your contact information, your website, like easy for people to find. And I would still try to either share work or post or comment on somebody else's post at least once or twice a week. And I found that to be a great way not only to stay in front of people, but to try to generate some warm leads.
Yeah,
But as
you're
far
good at
as far
LinkedIn.
as thanks, but as far as verifying, I don't know. I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. So, uh, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I don't I wonder if you like you mentioned freelancing for maybe like a couple different companies. I wonder if you could just put like freelance art director or whatever and just like list the companies in the description or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's maybe it just depends on like what you're using it for. And you could always like experiment, just do verified for a couple months, see if like you get more leads or you get more views. And like if it doesn't seem to make any difference, cancel it. I wonder if you could just try. Um, I have also seen in the design community that I am in most of the time, there are like very polar opposite opinions on LinkedIn. Like some people swear by
Hmm.
it, and some people are like, I hate LinkedIn. I'm never going on there. So I think it just comes down to like what platform you enjoy and feel like is most helpful for you. And then personally, I don't think the verification matters, but that's just my own experience. It could be really helpful for someone else. So, and that probably wasn't very helpful.
No,
Well,
it was. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, it seems like a silly question, and it's probably definitely good practice to keep it up to date. But just how up to date when you're jumping from client to client, and
Yeah.
so. But thank you guys.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking.
yeah. Sorry, one thing that I just wanted to add too is and sorry if you hear beeping, there's some construction going on, New York City problems. One thing I wanted to add to that, Sarah, is on LinkedIn, I know that they have there's like an option where you can do like a paid thing to see like who's looked at your profile and like it allows you to I'm totally blanking on like the feature, but there's like a paid feature on LinkedIn. I can't remember if it's like InMail or for business there's like a business feature that allows you to connect with more people, see who viewed your profile, and like send messages directly to people you don't know. So if anything, I feel like that might be something good to experiment with. I tried it out. I think I did it for maybe about 6 months, like during the pandemic. And I was able to make a lot of new connections that way. And I think they might even offer a trial. So,
Okay. I think
that maybe,
that's what I
yeah.
was thinking verified was. But
Okay.
actually, I think verified is just where you like verify that this is definitely you, right? I think I
Yeah.
did. that anyway. Yeah.
I think
Um,
it's like if you were to get like a check next to your profile and it makes you
yeah,
look more,
gotcha.
official.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, we have how often do you update your packages and prices? I probably update mine every couple months. If it's really slow, I'll probably leave them. I try not to lower them ever. But if I'm like getting a lot of inquiries and like everyone is pretty much accepting proposals, that's kind of like a sign that, okay, I'm going to bump it up a little bit because this is like in demand, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. And German, thank you for joining us today too. German is a friend of mine, and German is
Oh,
a
nice.
amazing, talented photographer who does photography for people's dating profiles.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and he is like the number one result on Google. Like he is a very talented guy. He's got a great eye. Um, yeah, I just just want to say thank you for joining today, German. And I agree with Alyssa. I don't think there's much that I would really add to your response. I think I wouldn't you could change the packages. Let's say if you're like learning a new skill or you have maybe an add-on that you want to offer, then maybe, experiment with adding that into the mix. But as far as prices, I would probably keep the prices either the same or just, charge more. I would never go down in price. But I would, continue to charge more, especially the more experience and work that you have doing that.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, awesome. Well, thank you all for the great questions and for sticking around for the past 2 o'clock. It was great
Yes.
to see some friends and meet some new people, and hopefully we can stay connected. Feel free to reach out. Well, I don't want to speak for Eric. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime.
Oh
I don't
yeah, please reach out. Of course.
yeah, reach out to us anytime. And hopefully we'll catch you in at the next chat. In 2 months, in what is 2 months? June, I'll be hosting a talk with a website accessibility expert about how we can design sites in a way that are accessible for our clients and be keeping accessibility standards in mind as web designers. So if you are a web designer, if that interests you, be on the lookout for that announcement. But yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Yes. Thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure. And yeah, thank you, Alyssa, also for jumping on here. It was a lot of fun. We appreciate everyone sticking around for a little bit so we could get through the questions. And of course, just want to say, please, feel free to reach out to either of us. Let's stay connected. And we'll be sending maybe just a follow-up email to say thank you. And keep an eye out for some of those freebies that I'll be sending your way too.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.